Welcome to Tort Talk. I am Marc Rioux here with Jon Robinson and Joe Fantini as usual. This week, Roundup hits the Supreme Court in a landmark oral argument, plus more Roundup fireworks with a class action settlement fight, then a major breakthrough in the Talc litigation, and the weight loss drug cases are heating up on two different fronts. Big week. Let's dig into it.
Yeah, Joe, we had, for the first time in a very long time, we had the Supreme Court hearing a case that is directly related to plaintiffs' attorneys. Yesterday, April 27th, Supreme Court heard this case from Bear. Oral argument was yesterday. What was this about for those who haven't been following us all along, and what impact could it have?
All right, one quick thing before we get into this episode. Jon and I are going to be at Mass Tort Puerto Rico, and I'm not saying that their 5th anniversary is the year to go, but I am heavily implying it. It's a milestone year, and the event has real momentum. And we'll be there recording episodes of the Jon and Marc podcast as the official podcast sponsor of Mass Torts Puerto Rico. So if you've been debating it, stop being weird and just buy a ticket. Join Jon and I May 5th through 7th in beautiful San Juan at Mass Torts Puerto Rico. Get all the info and register at masstortsportorico.com. Back to the show.
Yeah, this is a huge case, like you mentioned. Maybe once a year, once every other year, we get a mass tort case in front of the Supreme Court. But what we were arguing about yesterday was the preemption argument. So this is a case where the plaintiff received a verdict of $1.25 million. It got appealed up. Basically, there was a split in authority between the circuits on whether or not a state was able to update their warnings and require additional warnings after a label had been approved by the government. This instance, it was under FIFA, so something different than the FDA that we see in a drug and device case. So the defendants are making the same argument that we see in the FDA cases, that because the government and regulatory authority approved the label, the states aren't able to make any changes, even if they get additional information. Even if new studies come out, the label can't be updated. So it was about an hour and a half long oral argument. There were some really top players, experienced Supreme Court counsel there. We'll see what happens. We'll have a decision within about 60 days, but I don't know how happy we're going to be about the outcome if you guys were holding my feet to the fire right now.
Waiting to see the result on this one, but yeah, I think doesn't seem to be giving positive signs.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with the split of the court, right? It's 6-3 right now, so I'd probably expect the decision coming down 6-3, 5-4. We'll see what happens, but good news, even if we were to lose this, it would send waves through mass torts, like we talked about, paraquat, hair relaxer, but the other causes of actions are still out there, right? Design defect, negligence. This only goes to failure to warn. Definitely would be a win for the defendants, but, the cases are still viable. We just need to go back to the drawing board, maybe work a little bit of different angle in some of those cases.
Sticking with Roundup, we're seeing a flurry of activity in this litigation outside of the Supreme Court argument. There's an oral argument scheduled for April 30th in the Roundup MDL on a motion to intervene related to the Missouri class action settlement. Can you tell us the latest on this argument and this Missouri class action?
Yeah, so we talked about it before. There's a $7.25 billion proposed class action in Missouri State Court. Right now, the opt-out deadline is June 4th, which is going to be before the Supreme Court decision comes down, importantly. And then there's going to be a hearing in July, a final approval hearing. What we have going on now is in the MDL, two law firms filed a motion to intervene. Basically, they're seeking the court in the MDL court, who previously denied a similar class action, to get involved in this Missouri action and kind of bring a halt to this class action settlement, which they say was kind of done too quickly. It was done behind closed doors. It doesn't compensate the victims enough, and it doesn't follow the law. So we have this upcoming argument, like you mentioned, on the 30th. We should get a ruling rather quickly. I'd probably say within 30 days. If I was a betting man, I think the MDL court might elect to not get involved with this one. Everything I'm hearing is the Missouri class actions going through, and that seems to be the most likely outcome.
Yeah, hearing the same on our end as well.
Yeah, the two law firms on that, it's Whites and Luxembourg, and then the Miller law firm.
A lot of activity happening in Roundup, between the Supreme Court, what's happening in Missouri. Hopefully we see Roundup kind of finish its cycle around the sun and come to some conclusion by the end of this year. But definitely a lot of progress happening, which is good to see, right? We're getting in court, we're getting some decisions being made, we're seeing progress. Another case, we've talked about this one for a while, talcum powder, maybe some light at the end of the tunnel here. We've got the first post Johnson & Johnson bankruptcy court-ordered MDL mediation. What's the current status going on with Talc?
Yeah, and Talc, I think the disdain between the parties maybe has taken a step back. We talked a little bit about the Beasley Allen disqualification. The majority of the plaintiffs obviously don't agree with that. They really carried this litigation for a decade plus, but now that they're out of the litigation in New Jersey and the MDL, we have this first ordered mediation. We already have a negotiating group that's in place. We got on the plaintiff side a positive Daubert ruling earlier this year. The cases are set for trial. There's going to be a number of cases going to trial outside of the MDL this year. We're pretty much winning every case. Even the last case that we talked about was the Philadelphia $250,000 verdict. Again, not a huge number, but a win for the plaintiffs. So this momentum and the pressure is really building on J&J. I don't think we're going to have a settlement come out of this mediation, but I am hopeful that we can get another few court wins. We can get a trial set in the MDL, and then hopefully maybe this year, beginning of next year, we're talking about a resolution in this litigation that's been around way too long.
Yeah, hopefully some clients finally see justice and compensation because this has been going on way too long. Rounding off the list today, we have weight loss. We have parallel litigations ongoing with vision loss and gastrointestinal cases, both in New Jersey and in the MDLs. What are the key developments in this litigation, Joe?
Yeah, we got a lot of activity going on in the MDL. So first we'll start with vision loss. We have about 70 cases pending there, around the same number of cases pending in New Jersey for vision loss. By comparison, in the MDL for the gastrointestinal injuries, we're above 3,500 cases, but about 2 years behind. So we just had a case management conference in the MDL on the vision loss cases. We're getting geared up to really start getting that litigation moving, trying to schedule the all-important science day, working on the fact sheet, working on some of the initial pleadings. We're still in that initial 6-month kind of formation of the litigation, but we'll have that all in place in the next couple months, see that litigation really start to pick up. But there's a lot of work and a lot of discovery to be done before we get to that all-important Daubert hearing. But talking about the Daubert hearing, we're finally there in the MDL for the gastrointestinal injuries. You guys remember we talked maybe 6 months ago, we had a ruling from the judge who really was focusing the injuries on the gastroparesis, requiring some sort of gastric emptying study, which kind of limited the inventory of those cases. More than 85% of the inventory are gastroparesis. And now we're having the Daubert hearing. It's scheduled for May 14th. Both sides will be able to come in, present their experts, ask them some serious questions. Then we'll get a ruling from the judge probably in 60 to 90 days. So before the end of the summer, we'll know if these cases can go forward and what injuries are going to be included. So a lot of excitement in that litigation. I think we'll see a big uptake in filings after the Daubert ruling. We're at 3,500 right now. Probably get to 6 to 7 by the end of the year. Sometime next year, it will be above that 10,000 threshold.
Yeah, 3,500 seems low for now. I was expecting this one to be a massive docket just based on the total amount of people that use this drug across the nation right now.
Yeah, I'm really expecting it to kick up. Like I said, the injuries are really focused on gastroparesis. We'll see what comes out after the Daubert ruling, which ones are going to be viable. But I think we'll get above the 10,000. But you're right, this isn't going to probably be a 50,000 Talc or Roundup litigations that some were thinking in the beginning.
Yeah.
We also have some updates, not necessarily news, but for those who were closely watching the Uber trial that concluded a couple weeks ago, just to keep everybody up to date on what the next steps are in that litigation, we do have consecutive trials set in the MDL for the middle of September. And then also in California, we have the next bellwether trial slated coming up next month in May. There's also a status conference before Judge Breyer set for tomorrow, actually, for April 29th. So we are seeing progress continue to be made on Uber, as we saw Lyft get consolidated a couple months ago. Continue to keep an eye on those. The rulings that we had in the previous both state and MDL trials for Uber, I think are leaning towards us continuing to see progress for the plaintiff. So, Joe, I'm still optimistic about Uber and the direction that we're heading.
Yeah, I agree. Like you said, we're getting these trial dates. That's really important. That's what really drives settlement. Honestly, in mass torts, we don't see 6 trials in a year. It's kind of unheard of. So if we can get those trial dates to hold that you mentioned, 6 verdict, maybe the defendants get lucky, they get one of those. But if we go 2 or 3 on those cases, I think we could kind of be talking about winding down this litigation. We talked a little bit before about how some of the filings indicate there could be settlements ongoing in some individual trial cases. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some of those other trial cases fall off the docket because of that, but the pressure is definitely on them. 2 out of 3 is a good place to be at. We'll see what happens in this next trial. It's in state court. You mentioned there, that's where the defendants did get the win. So we'll see how that plays out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're also seeing progress at the state level, right? There's lawsuits for, as we see for a lot of these technology platforms. There are the MDL and the California lawsuits, and then we also see the lawsuits directly filed by the state attorney generals against Uber. We're seeing that happen also in Roblox, and very interesting news that has come out the past couple of weeks with Roblox resolving some of those cases with the attorney general, which part of those settlements, not just monetary, it's actually making changes to the platforms.
Yeah, so that's a good point. We saw, I think, 3 so far at this point, 10 to 13 million. Each state will probably end up seeing 40, 45 of those attorney generals do similar things. The money helps, right? It goes to training, it goes to schools, but more importantly, it's about bringing about the changes like you talked about to the platform. So in every one of these mass torts, we talked about it before we can get to a settlement, the defendants need to make these changes. So whether it's putting another Zantac or Roundup on the market or making changes to the platforms to limit their liability, that's a key component that we always see before we really get serious about negotiations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're effectively making changes that are going to prevent these things from happening in the future, hopefully, which from a plaintiff's lawyer perspective means once those changes go into place, we're not going to see the ability to actually get these cases anymore, and we're going to be looking at a finite pool. So it's good, right? The issues stop happening, children stop being affected, but it does change the dynamic just from a business perspective for any attorneys who are looking at these cases.
Yeah, certainly. But that's part of why we do it is we want to help people.
Yep.
and bring about changes. So trust me, Roblox would not make any of these changes if there weren't any lawsuits or the AGA, weren't coming down on them. So
Yeah, they're not making the changes out of the kindness of their heart.
yeah, there's a reason. So got to keep the pressure up. And I think it's been good. We talked about, in this episode, this multi-prong attack, right? That's how you make change in these cases. State court, MDLs, AGs, keep the pressure going because they have such a resource pool, so many attorneys, they can fight back. But we can keep pressing and they'll ultimately make these changes, which helps the clients, which is what we're all here trying to do.
And then next week we're recording live. Me and Jon are recording live from Mass Torts, Puerto Rico.
Yeah, Joe, you're welcome to join us in Puerto Rico on the beach.
Yeah, it's nice. I don't know.
We'll Zoom you in if we have to.
It's all good. We'll be live in Puerto Rico at Mass Torts, Puerto Rico. The Jon and Marc podcast over there recording. We'll be recording Tort Talks live with Joe zooming in, as well as we'll be getting the inside scoop on what's going on from the who's who that is on the attendee list for Mass Torts Puerto Rico, it is quite a who's who list of lawyers attending. And it is quite nice because there's not a lot of vendors going, but there's a lot of lawyers going.
Yes. We looked at that list and my gosh, literally everybody who is making decisions in these cases is there. Start planning your summer. Linear Trial Academy coming up in June. We're not that far away. That's probably the next big event you need to have on your radar after Mass Torts Puerto Rico. And if you do not subscribe to the Jon and Marc podcast and you're just catching this Tort Talk on LinkedIn or you're catching a one-off episode on YouTube, you do not want to miss next week's podcast guest. It is a very special surprise. Probably the best guest we've had so far, right, Marc?
I think so.
Up there pretty high, other than Joe. We love Joe.
Yes.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this week's Tort Talk. We've got a lot of news breaking, a lot of things coming out over the next couple of weeks. We'll be in Mass Torts Puerto Rico next week, recording live. We can't wait to see all of you there who are joining us. Everyone else, catch our recording with Joe on the usual schedule. Thank you for the best 10 minutes in Mass Torts each week. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Marc.